Hi guys, welcome to the HarleQuest Q&A video, the first of probably a few that we're going to do. The Kickstarter's coming up pretty soon, that's on the 1st of April, so wanted to see if you guys had any questions about the game so far, and we got a couple back on Twitter, one back on Mastodon, so yeah, we're just going to fire right in with some answers for those. So the first question is from Dreamcast Freak, and that's a great username, obviously a massive Dreamcast fan if you can't tell. But yeah, the question is, will it have a story?
I like the ones with a story. What?
Cutscenes, customization, etc. So the game will have a story. I've written a story, but I want to tell that story through the characters' body language and through their actions, rather than telling it through text if possible. I'm a big fan of that approach. It makes a lot of things easier, and I think it's also a lot more fun than just having to read a lot of things. It's better for people who have dyslexia. It's easier to translate the game to other languages because there isn't as much text. And you also don't have to get voice actors in, which I have thought about, but I think maybe for this game it's not the best idea. I think trying to do everything using physical communication, physical comedy. So there is a story, but there'll be an element of interpretation to the story that's there on purpose. So I hope that people enjoy that. Cutscenes are a big part of that, yeah. So we want to have cutscenes where the player's action isn't stopped to watch the cutscene and go back to the game, but instead when they enter a room or they're between sections, we just have little in-engine sequences that play between the characters before the player resumes control. So I want it to feel quite dynamic and not get in the way too much. Customization, I don't know. I haven't thought about customization that much yet. I think if it feels like the game is too repetitive, as can happen with roguelikes. Roguelikes, obviously you die and start from the beginning every time, so HarleQuest is no exception. That's designed that way, so if that gets a little repetitive or you need a bit of variety, I could see customization as being a good way just to kind of spice things up a little. Also, it's a great way to reward the player for milestones that they hit, because they have to start again anyway, but if they've unlocked some cosmetics, maybe that's like a nice thing to have. So I'm open to the idea, but it's not really planned yet. So we'll see what we do with that. Yeah, so thanks for the question, Dreamcast Freak. The next question is from Nick. This came in on Mastodon. What kind of DC-specific features, peripherals do you plan to support? Recent indie Dreamcast games have supported net ranking, mouse and keyboard, twin stick, VMU games, and even online play. Will we see anything like that in this game? I think that the games that do that, it's really cool that they do that, and it's a big part of the Dreamcast history is all the different peripherals. However, HarleQuest it's about the core game experience. It's not really about taking advantage of peripherals or features. So that's not really a focus, but what is important is making sure that everyone's controllers work however they like to play the Dreamcast. So that includes the official controller, the Retro Strikers DC controller, the Brook Wingman SD getting support for modern controllers played using Bluetooth, and any other controller type that is a typical controller a player might have. It's important for me that we just get the best possible experience with those. We will have some limited VMU support in the game as well. Nothing where you have a mini game that plays separately, but we'll use the screen during gameplay, and we do save some amount of data to the VMU, although it isn't the same as like a save state or anything. It's things like how far has the player got in their previous runs, and we use that for certain things to do with the loot table generation, but that's another topic. So yeah, thank you very much for the question. The last question is from Pizza Hotline, who by the way does amazing music, do retro game inspired like drum and bass kind of liquid music. It's really cool. You should definitely listen to it. It's great while you're working to have on in the background. So Pizza Hotline asked, what was it that made you want to make a Dreamcast version? So this is going to be a slightly longer answer, but I'll go through it. So there's two distinct reasons why I chose to focus on the Dreamcast as a target platform. The first reason is more nostalgic. So I was a latecomer to the platform. I didn't really hear about it until after it was discontinued, but it did have that like Japanese import allure of something that's high quality, but it's a bit obscure and culturally a little different to the kinds of things we would normally see in the West. The things you'd see advertised or the types of consoles most people played are like really different to the Dreamcast, so it stood out to me that way. My friend, the neighbour next door, had a Dreamcast just shortly after it was discontinued. I'd go round to his house and play a few games. We played Sonic Adventure, we played Street Fighter Alpha 3, and I would sit and look at the VMU and see the Chow from Sonic Adventure on there. I'd enjoy just like the really vibrant, crisp graphics. It just looked a hell of a lot better than anything that I would play. And I always had the previous generation console of whatever the current generation console was. So I had, like, at that time it would be PlayStation 1 and N64. So to play the Dreamcast then was pretty mind-blowing. But by the time I was older and I kind of had the money to get the latest console, that was GameCube time. That was when the GameCube came out. It was a big deal to me. So the Dreamcast I kind of didn't experience after that. That was just the time in my life. But a few years later, I was learning game programming. I was teaching myself and gearing up to go to college, and I saw a YouTube series from the Elysian Shadows dev team called Adventures in Game Development. I'm laughing because that wasn't the original name. It had a funnier original name. But it was a series about a bunch of guys making a new RPG for the Dreamcast. And I thought, that's really cool that you can do that. The fact that it's possible to make a game for a console without having to be like a staff member at a massive game studio. You don't necessarily need a license for this. It's something that's like, it's quite precious really, that you can do that. It's quite cool. So that stuck in my mind. It wasn't something that I like acted on right away, but it just kind of planted a seed. And then many years later, when I was a professional game programmer at a mobile game studio, I saw a Dreamcast in a second-hand shop, in a pawn shop, and it was £30 at the time. I think it was $40. And I bought that and thought to myself, I'd love to get my own code running on there at some point. So, you know, I bought that, I had it around, and then eventually I thought, yeah, let's just give it a go, let's get some code running on it. And I wrote a very simple program, and as soon as it ran on the system and I could see my own thing running on the console, I kind of fell in love. I was like, this is awesome, this is so much fun. And online, the resources to learn and understand about the system are expansive. There's so much stuff online about the CPU architecture, about the layer that you use to communicate with the system that's like an operating system, but it's slimmer, called Callisto OS. There's loads of stuff about that. Just how to program graphics for the system. You can use stuff that's a bit like the PC, or you can do it in a way that's very tailored to the Dreamcast, that's more efficient. Yeah, I could go on, like it's fascinating to me. So I really got hooked around that time. And yeah, from there, that was the path that led me into Dreamcast development. So that's the nostalgic side of things. The other side is kind of more technical and creative, and it's that by today's standards, the Dreamcast is actually a very underpowered system. Like, it's less powerful than the original iPhone. And I think, like, it's an Orson Welles quote, something like, the enemy of art is the absence of limitation. So having a limited amount of resources like CPU power and memory, it forces you to choose the most important aspects of the game. What's the sweet spot of like what you want the player to experience, and that's all that fits. Everything else has to go, and then that way when the player actually plays it, they get the best. It's all killer, no filler. There's no room for filler. Whereas like with modern consoles, you feel like you've got all these resources available and you have to fill it all with something. You've got to make extra art assets, you've got to just kind of add layers to it. I think sometimes they come out a little overcooked. I think sometimes modern games don't get to the point quickly enough. They don't have that same sensibility, that kind of minimalism, if you like, which I find really appealing in older games. So that's a big part of the appeal of the console for me. And of course, an extra benefit with the Dreamcast is that you can burn your game onto a CD, you can send it to somebody, anybody with a Dreamcast, they pop it in, they turn it on, it works. You don't need mods on the console, although many of us do that for fun anyway. It's not necessary if you want to play indie games for the Dreamcast. They're region free, you know, it's such a nice simple distribution method, and nowadays it is like perfect. You know, if you wanted to play, if you wanted to make a new game for the GameCube, for example, like I know that you can do that more easily now than you could before, but it still requires a little bit of technical know-how. You can't just go to your local retro game shop or what have you, buy a GameCube, put an indie game in and expect it to work, as far as I'm aware. Whereas the Dreamcast has had that as a capability for a long time. So yeah, I won't go into the history of like piracy on the system and why it failed and things like that. That's a whole other topic that I've got a lot of specific opinions on. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that helps developers. Yeah, the last thing I'll say about that is you could make the argument, and I've heard the argument, that the reason you'd make a Dreamcast game is because if you make an indie game for PC or for console, that it just gets snowed under, it gets totally buried by all the other indie games on those systems. That is true, and it doesn't happen with the Dreamcast as much because it's part of the retro scene, and so you've got like access to press from that scene. You know, people will promote the game because it's on the Dreamcast. Like that's definitely an element of, or an advantage to doing a Dreamcast game, but that isn't something that even really crossed my mind when learning about this stuff. It was just a kind of happy side effect. So I wasn't being tactical about that. That's just coincidence, really. So yeah, that's it. That's why I'm making a Dreamcast game. I hope that very comprehensive and long answer wasn't too boring. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions about the game, pop them in the comments below. You can give me a shout on Twitter, on Mastodon. I'm on Discord. There's the HarleQuest Discord all about the game. You can hop on there and ask questions. Got a nice little community going now. And yeah, stay tuned for the Kickstarter. Stay tuned for updates over the next couple of weeks. Getting a demo together. And yeah, cheers.